In the early 50s, Muslims started coming from India, Pakistan to this country, and the first few settlers were in Balham and Tooting. So the first Shia Muslim activity started from Balham, very close to this place.
Not only do we have a large number of Church of England, nonconformist archives, Jewish collections, we also have other things that would be very interesting, things like photographs, plans, street maps, all sorts of different organizations, from businesses to the London County Council, Greater London Council.
Wandsworth has never historically had a voluntary sector infrastructure, and when we came into the borough, what we did know, and the work that Katrina did, is the faith communities, and many of you here who actually kept the social activism work going in the borough. And 13 years later, as the tide changes and local authorities want to do more work with communities, in Wandsworth in particular, it's the faith communities that have all those faith ties.
I stress we're not primarily intending to do new research ourselves. Rather, the objective is to make research that has been done more accessible, but also, very importantly, to encourage and equip others to take this work forward, and that's very much what this afternoon is about. My main message is about the value of our project, and more generally of looking at a historical perspective for religious groups and communities at the present time. We do feel that people can learn a lot very positively from history, getting a sense of identity, also learning perhaps from things that were done in the past but are now forgotten, but may well be still empowering in the present.
Now, after abolition, the Caribbean islands dropped out of focus here in Britain. The abolitionists felt that their job was done, and they expected the newly freed African Caribbeans not only to enjoy their freedom, but to find prosperity and a new way of life. The reality was far from this. Well, the importance of history is because history enables us to understand where we are now, and therefore to look forward. If we don't know what's gone on beforehand, we can't really understand the present situation. And that's the situation, especially with young people, particularly the third generation of Caribbeans, who are the ones who were involved in the riots in Tottenham and other parts of London. If we don't understand the background to this, we don't understand what's happened.
First of all, I'm really excited with this project. I think it's a very important project. I think history is really, really important. Many of people like me who've come here as part of the immigration population, we hung on to our culture, we understood our culture from our perspective. But the young population, the younger generation that's coming up, who is very challenging, asking some very strong questions, and we're not able to provide the answers. And I think we need to create this history for them to put it into perspective so they can actually make some sense of it. And we need to present the history in the sense that it can make some sense for them.
I'm of the view that every generation, subsequent generation, has, I would want to call it the sacred responsibility to preserve its history.
And there's some great examples today from some of the other faith groups in terms of how they're archiving. Clearly some groups are further ahead than others, and I think it'd be good maybe to bring the experience of those who've archived their histories with websites to support it, to maybe organizations like ours. Yes, we have a book, but there's still a lot more that we need to do to make the information accessible, particularly to the next generation. So that's one thing I'd like to see come out of here.
Today I'm going to say a little about religious archives and their importance as one of the resources available to faith groups. I would like those present to at least be a little more aware of their archival heritage and the use to which archives can be put to support their missions today, not just research into the past, but to advance knowledge of their traditions and to infuse their own community in their own tradition.
Our history goes back about 170 years, but our history is from the East End of London. So I'm sure you know that Jews came across from Eastern Europe, Eastern and Central Europe, to the port areas in East London.
Richmond Park is why Roehampton exists. Back in the 16th century, there was no Richmond Park as such. It was just the sort of not terribly productive land that stretched to the west from the outskirts of London. This is an act of love done by probably a mum or a dad in Roehampton shortly after the First World War to record those young men that went to the First World War and those that were killed. So, you know, this is a record of them, but it's also done in such a way that it's a memorial and a piece of love, and it, you know, for that, if no other reason, it ought to be preserved.
I think if we do not document it, then it would mean that the time will come, even if you take a decade or two, 20 years from now, we would be losing a lot of useful information, because every day that is passing by, nobody knows who is going to leave this world. And there may be somebody who has so much wealth of information and we have not reached out to him. So we need to take the opportunity in today's day of technology, use the iPad, the iPod and the iPhone to reach out to those people and at least make a recording of it. And I think this is what I've gained from this event.
We who have been born and brought up here in the UK have been taught to question and reason, and will not now accept blindly the rituals and practices of our faith.
And it's said that in the early 1870s, records state that there wasn't a need, or they didn't think about building a Baptist church in this area, because it said so few dissenting friends resided in the neighbourhood.
I think you don't get the opportunity sometimes to get people from different communities together. I think you don't really learn about it at school, about certain histories, as much as you possibly could do. But also it's not just about seeing or looking into the formal histories, it's about looking at ordinary people's histories, their experiences. So I think that's quite often missed out by all those things you mentioned. So I think it's good to address those.
Well, I think I'd encourage any group to look in their dusty cupboards and top shelves and see what records of the past that may have been neglected for many years you may still have, and seek advice as to how to take better care of them, but make sure that nothing is thrown away without sort of due reflection on how it might be useful for informing the past. Secondly, I'd encourage people to think about their building, what perhaps it tells you about the history of the community. There may be very different experiences of taken over and sort of borough buildings, or perhaps an old building that really does tell you quite a lot about how your group has evolved over past years. And thirdly, talk to older people, record their memories while they're still with us, and perhaps sort of encourage younger people to work with old people in doing that, because it can be a very positive process in sort of bridging the generations.